This is the article entitled Electricity by Bicknell Young. Mrs. Eddy, in the third edition, speaks of the electricity of mortal mind, and calls it the essence of mortal and erring mind that counterfeits that essence of the unerring and eternal mind, termed Holy Ghost. Science and Health, page 293, in the present edition. Criticism, condemnation, censure, etc., are all claims of destructive electricity, and you should handle the claim of electricity in all your thinking. All claim of conflict and opposition of what we call malpractice can be recognized as a claim of destructive electricity. But the fact remains that there is no destructive electricity, because every cell, fiber, and substance expresses within itself all the qualities of the Father-Mother God, existing as God's own identity. There is no electricity in God's identity, the one and only man there, you, I, and everybody. All of mortal mind is a claim of electricity, because it is all a claim of two, a claim of opposites, a claim of good and evil, mind and matter, love and hate, etc. A claim of positive and negative, acting and reacting. A claim of magnetism, attracting and repelling. A claim of Antichrist, of resistance to Christ. A claim of a positive evil and a negative good. All of it a claim of magnetic power or electricity. Therefore, as Mrs. Eddy is quoted as saying, operating in the individual, it claims to attract evil to that individual and to repel good. And when, through treatment, the claim refuses to yield to treatment, it is because the repelling force of electricity claims to be greater than the attracting power of truth. In the claim of supply, the so-called power of electricity repels the manifestation of the affluence of good, attracts fear or limitation, and its seeming manifestation. End quote. Mrs. Eddy says also that electricity works as sex attraction, or by reaction or reversal as sex friction. This is the foundation for hate and malpractice of all kinds, including sin, sickness, and death. The denial of electricity as presence or power destroys the root of evil, and man is free to manifest the truth and the infinite forms of good. I cannot be negatively electrified. End quote. Science and Health, page 97, and page 536. So-called electricity is only a so-called state of mind. Science and Health, page 161. Aggressive mental suggestion claims to function as destructive electrical influence. All there is of the claim of so-called destructive electricity is conflicting mortal opinions and beliefs. Science and Health, page 273. All there is of so-called physical ills is the consenting on our part to be mesmerized by these conflicting mortal opinions, so-called destructive electricity, until our disturbed thinking claims to objectify itself as some discordant phenomenon. Our protection from this influence lies in taking the offensive against the suggestions which claim to act as a positive evil upon some so-called negative good, and in being the Christ consciousness, the harmonious deific thought force, the spiritual discernment of what we scientifically know. There is no negative good, and there is no positive evil. No negative God acted upon by positive evil suggestions. Your spiritual discernment is the infinite positive, which acts upon every false claim as its negative, mere negation. Science and Health, page 102. Mrs. Eddy says, spirit is positive. Science and Health, page 173. So do not be negative. Be positive to false suggestion. Handle the claim of sex antagonism by first denying it, and then translating it into the spiritual counterfact, the male and female of God's creating, masculine wisdom and feminine love, which coexists as the twofold nature of the infinite God, reflected as the individual man. Not a positive male and a negative female person, nor a positive female and a negative male person. For each individual exists as the complete unfoldment of the twofold nature of the Father, Mother, God. Handle the suggestions of sex antagonism by discerning the equality of masculine wisdom and feminine love in the Christ consciousness. There is no superior male or female. For the male and female of God's creating, wisdom and love exist as the all-harmonious one in the individual consciousness, the Christ consciousness, scientific understanding, and spiritual discernment. A student of Christian Science worked out a beautiful healing of so-called kidney trouble, passing of blood, pain, etc., by handling the claim of sex antagonism, by discerning there was no conflict, no antagonism, no friction between the male and female of God's creating. Masculine wisdom and feminine love, scientific understanding and spiritual discernment, to set up any irritation, as there seemed to be between husband and wife. She discerned that the manhood and womanhood of God, masculine wisdom and feminine love, had never been separated from or antagonistic to each other, but that man expresses God's true nature of truth and love, masculine wisdom and feminine love, scientific understanding, and spiritual discerning, and is the complete manifestation of the divine idea. The healing was accomplished in one treatment. The wife manifested more of the scientific reasoning than she did of its spirit, and the husband, who manifested something of the spirit of Christian Science, but did very little scientific reasoning, felt greatly irritated because his wife so often urged him to do more. Was that not a beautiful healing of a claim of electricity? A claim of a positive and negative, claiming to operate as sex friction, sex antagonism? The kidney trouble was only the so-called phenomenon of the conflicting beliefs entertained in consciousness. Then don't you think that any claim of error would be met for Christian Scientists by handling the claim of electricity? The claim of electricity is only some electrifying belief objectified. Fear, suspicion, greed, therefore translated back into its own counter-reality, the spiritual discernment of the one harmonious, spontaneous power, the spiritual discernment of truth and love. There is no friction, no conflict, no magnetic curse, no opposing force, because there is only the one great infinite mind power, one limitless thought force of love, the force of spirit, the spiritual discernment of love, life, truth, unfolding, embracing, and constituting its perfect harmonious identity. And you and your Father, Mother, God are one, the Almighty One of spiritual discernment, the infinite I Am. Has the unfoldment of the day's work we have had here together made it clear to you that everything has to be translated back into spirit, its counterfact? Science and Health, page 209. And now that divine science is taking away the world's belief in matter, its next great demonstration is to take away the world's belief in evil. And it is because divine science is doing it that the claims of evil are so aggressive today. It is the unfoldment of truth in the world that is stirring up all this resistance, which we recognize as painful chemicalization. And now that Christian Scientists must demonstrate the mastery over it, must handle it for themselves and the rest of the world, must maintain law and order. Science and Health, page 97. And hold crime in check, must demonstrate its nothingness. This responsibility rests upon Christian Scientists and must be fulfilled, and they must cheerfully await the certainty of ultimate perfection. How shall we meet the demands this age is making on us? By denying the claims of an evil mind power and discerning the spiritual counterfact, the irresistible Christ power, the one infinite mind force operating as all power, all presence, omnipotent love, constituting all consciousness, and determining its own outward harmonious phenomena. If Christian scientists are discerning daily the powerlessness of so-called evil mind power to determine an outward phenomena, the chemicalization will be less severe, and it will shorten the days of error, and this is our great necessity. The uncovering and upheaval of so-called evil thought in the world is only evidence of what divine science is doing to bring these claims to the surface. Then, do we need to stand aghast and wonder what is going to happen next? The unfoldment of truth and love, which has brought these evil suggestions to the surface, will melt them away if you and I are faithful to our unfoldment, to deny these aggressive suggestions until their powerlessness is recognized in our spiritual discernment of the irresistible Christ power, in the one infinite God power, the power of our scientific denials and spiritual discernment. Do you feel the necessity of standing your test and demonstrating your ability not to be mesmerized by aggressive mental suggestions, and to maintain your firm stand and balance as the Christ consciousness? Our great work is to demonstrate the powerlessness of evil suggestions to do anything as a claim of an evil mind power to determine phenomenon, and thereby to demonstrate God's allness. Science and Health, page 233. Christian scientists must first demonstrate for themselves that nothingness of error, if they are going to demonstrate its nothingness to the world. The sign the world is seeking after is the freedom from suffering. And if Christian scientists can demonstrate to the world, and they must, the nothingness of its misery, then the world will be eager to hear all that Christian science has to say about the allness of God and the nothingness of error. That will enable the world to demonstrate for itself the allness of God and the nothingness of error by way of its own spiritual discernment. Read Message for 1900, page 3. The Oriental concept of God would separate the world from Christ, the spiritual idea, or idea of spirit. It claims that what is called matter is spiritual substance, and that the so-called mortal mind is the divine mind, or spirit, not knowing the difference. It is the claim of spiritualizing matter, calling material sense spiritual, a claim of an Oriental Tate that has appeared in all religious teaching and in all human thought, a claim of an inherited taint. And does it not claim to be objectified as so-called material or inherited taints? I was told that Mrs. Eddy once said that the claim of Qatar should be handled as false theology. All scholastic theology is a claim of man's separation from God. But there is no taint of Orientalism in our discernment of our oneness with God. There is no taint in God's selfhood. Therefore, none in ours, because there is only one selfhood. It is, as Mrs. Eddy said, Unity of Good, page 35, only an outlined falsity of consciousness, end quote. An outlined belief that man is something separate from God. Isn't that the taint of belief that Jesus and the early Christians had to dispel in their time? Isn't that the taint that Christian scientists have to dispel? That false concept that man is separate from God, from spirit, spiritual discernment. Would the spiritual discernment of God as man's identity, as both noumenon and phenomenon, the infinite one, the one God, the one being, the perfect and only I am, dispel all suggestions of taint? There is no taint. Spiritual discernment is the infinite I am, the infinite one, both God and man, both noumenon and phenomenon. John 10, verse 30. Read Miscellany, page 253. I and my Father are one. Quote, let the creature become one with his Creator, and mysticism departs. Heaven opens, right reigns, and you have begun to be a Christian Scientist. Miscellany, page 253. Orientalism is all of it a perverted concept of truth, Christ, divine science, but parading not only as Antichrist outside of Christianity, but also as the very vicar of Christ, as Christianity itself. Not only as opposition to Christian Science outside of its ranks, but also as opposition and conflict within its ranks, as Christian Science itself. All of it a claim of destructive electricity. Mrs. Eddy once said, know that electricity cannot convey poison to you through the pneumogastric nerve, for conflicting mortal opinions act as poison. End quote. In other words, would you say conflicting mortal opinions constitute the claim of electricity? Then would you also say that all of the world's error can be summed up in this claim of Orientalism, and that it should be always thoroughly handled? And would you say that all error should be handled as a claim of destructive electricity, a claim of positive and negative, a claim of dividing, disintegrating, destroying, the 3 Ds? We classify beliefs as good beliefs and bad beliefs. But when the bad beliefs claim to be good, when the worst claims to be the best, we have a claim of perversion. But this stage of error is the final or last stage of error and ripe for destruction. Because claiming the Christ power, but lacking it, lacking the power of spiritual discernment, the power of oneness with God, It cannot demonstrate its claims, but, as Mrs. Eddy says, destroys itself by making its claims. Science and Health, page 286.